This message is not an accident. You were meant to find it right now. There is a difference between someone who is captivated by what you display and someone who is anchored to who you actually are. Attention is effortless to offer. It glitters, it seduces, it burns hot and immediate. Attention is a currency freely spent by those who have no intention of investing. It requires no vulnerability, no risk, and no genuine understanding. Because of this, attention can vanish the instant it stops being entertained. What we are exploring today reaches far beyond that. We are speaking about a love that moves beneath your exterior and recognizes something timeless within you. This person does not simply admire how you appear when you are thriving. They notice who you become when you go still. They do not only show up when you are radiating in a room, they stay when you are doubtful, retreating, or exhausted from carrying everything alone. That is the first signal. Attention chases performance. Love seeks authenticity. Many people fall in love with illusions. They perceive what they wish to perceive. They attach to an impression, a fantasy, or a role you unconsciously inhabit because it serves their own needs. But when someone loves your soul, they are not seduced by appearances. They are drawn to your contradictions. They are steady with your complexities. They are not intimidated by your depth or your self-sufficiency. Instead of pulling away when they encounter your wounds or fears, they move closer with reverence. Another signal is this: they do not attempt to reshape you into a more manageable version of yourself. When someone craves only attention, they mold you to sustain it. They amplify the parts of you that amuse them and quietly suppress the parts that unsettle them. But when someone loves your soul, they honor your entirety. They do not require you to mute your intensity or smooth your edges simply to keep them comfortable. They recognize that your radiance and your darkness belong to each other. When we say real love perceives the unconscious parts of you, not just your visible personality, we are describing a level of awareness that transcends charm, transcends habit, and transcends the polished identity you offer the world. Every human being constructs a visible self. This is the version of you that understands how to speak appropriately, how to project competence, how to display composure, humor, capability, or steadiness. This social self is a masterpiece of adaptation. It learned very early in life what would earn love and what would invite rejection. It is the part sculpted by expectations, culture, family dynamics, and survival. Most connections function entirely at this level. People respond to how you present, how you act, and how you make them feel in the moment. They engage with your persona, not necessarily your interior world, but beneath that visible layer lives an entire unexplored terrain. There are fears you seldom voice, longings you barely acknowledge, old wounds that still color your responses, instincts you restrain to remain acceptable, and dreams you guard because they feel fragile. This inner world is not always rational or orderly. It holds vast contradictions. You can be self-assured and deeply uncertain simultaneously. You can hunger for closeness, yet genuinely dread vulnerability. You can be a pillar for everyone around you while secretly yearning for someone to see your profound exhaustion. Much of this runs entirely beneath your own awareness. You may not even fully recognize it yourself until someone else's presence brings it to the surface. When someone loves only your visible personality, they love what is accessible and uncomplicated. They appreciate your strengths, enjoy your wit, value your reliability, or are drawn to your presence. But their bond depends entirely on the continuation of that presentation. If you shift, struggle, withdraw, or reveal complexity, their affection may diminish because it was anchored only to the surface configuration of who you appear to be. To love the unconscious parts of you demands a radically different form of awareness. It means sensing patterns in you that you have not verbally disclosed. It means noticing when your irritation is actually grief, when your silence is armor, and when your fierce independence conceals a terror of burdening others. It involves reading the emotional currents beneath your language. This is not about mind reading. It is about attunement, an intuitive resonance with what exists underneath behavior. Such love does not respond only to what you present. It answers what you struggle to reveal. When you overcompensate with strength, this person senses the fatigue behind it. When you deflect with humor, they feel the tenderness underneath. When you withdraw, they do not leap to conclusions of rejection. They consider that you may simply be overwhelmed. They are not engaging merely with your actions, but with the deeper histories and motivations shaping those actions. This depth of perception can feel deeply unsettling. Being understood at that level exposes you. The unconscious is where shame, uncertainty, and unresolved pain frequently live. When someone acknowledges these territories without judgment or retreat, it generates a rare experience of psychological safety. You are no longer compelled to sustain constant performance. You can soften. You can contradict yourself. You can sit with confusion. The love holds. Loving the unconscious parts of someone also means accepting that they are incomplete. There are unresolved tensions, blind spots, and shifting identities. Rather than demanding wholeness, this kind of love is patient with becoming. It does not reduce you to your coping strategies or your failures. It sees them as expressions of deeper layers deserving understanding rather than correction. In this dynamic, intimacy grows transformative. You begin to comprehend yourself more clearly because someone else has reflected back pieces you had hidden or abandoned. Their presence functions as a mirror, illuminating both your wounds and your capacity. The relationship becomes a space where concealed aspects of you can gradually emerge into your conscious awareness, not through coercion, but through profound acceptance. When we say genuine connection is rooted in depth, not validation or attention, we are articulating a clear psychological contrast between two very different emotional realities. Validation and attention are potent forces. They stimulate the ego. They affirm identity. They generate a fleeting sense of being noticed, chosen, and momentarily elevated. When someone grants you attention, your nervous system responds. You feel witnessed. You feel significant. You feel wanted. But attention is frequently conditional. It depends on novelty, performance, reciprocity, or stimulation. It is sustained by excitement. Depth, however, is not constructed on stimulation. It is built upon understanding. A connection rooted in validation constantly seeks reassurance. Do you respect me? Do you approve of me? Do you require me? It quietly depends on external feedback. When that feedback diminishes, insecurity rises like a flood. The bond begins to feel fragile because it was anchored to response rather than genuine recognition. In relationships centered around attention, both individuals can become performers. One performs magnetism, brilliance, power, mystery, or achievement. The other performs adoration, longing, fascination, or need. There is a constant exchange, but the exchange is entirely surface-driven. The relationship nourishes the ego rather than the interior self. When circumstances shift, pressure escalates, appearance changes, confidence falters, or life becomes heavy. The structure fractures because it depended on sustaining a particular image. A connection rooted in depth functions differently. It does not depend on being perpetually dazzled by one another. It is not powered by relentless praise or theatrical intensity. Instead, it is sustained by genuine curiosity about the inner world of the other person. Depth means wanting to understand how someone thinks when no one is watching, what constructed their fears, what memories still shape their decisions, and what contradictions they carry. It involves an emotional investment in their internal landscape, not just their surface behavior. Validation says, "You make me feel worthy of myself." Depth says, "I want to understand who you are, even when that understanding demands something from me." Attention seeks an immediate emotional return. Depth tolerates discomfort. It is capable of sitting in silence, ambiguity, or complexity without demanding swift reassurance. When a connection is rooted in validation, conflict becomes destabilizing because it interrupts approval. Disagreement registers as abandonment. In contrast, when a connection is rooted in depth, conflict becomes instructive. It uncovers differences in history, perspective, and emotional wiring. Rather than weakening the bond, it can deepen it because both individuals are invested in understanding rather than dominance. Attention-driven relationships frequently feel electric at first. There is chemistry, relentless communication, and mounting anticipation, but intensity is not the same as intimacy. Intensity surges and crashes. Depth builds quietly. It forms through mutual vulnerability, sustained presence, and honest emotional exchange. It grows when two people allow each other to witness uncertainty, imperfection, and transformation over time. Another distinction rests in motivation. If someone is primarily drawn to validation, they may unconsciously pursue partners who admire them or depend upon them. The relationship becomes a reflection of their preferred self-image. But when someone reaches for depth, they are less concerned with how the relationship elevates their status or ego. They care more about mutual growth, emotional safety, and authenticity. Depth also preserves individuality because the bond is not sustained by constant affirmation. Space for independence remains. Each person can pursue their own becoming without fearing abandonment. The connection does not require perpetual proof of loyalty through attention. It is stabilized by trust and understanding rather than the frequency of praise. In a depth-based connection, silence does not signal disinterest. Space does not communicate detachment. The bond is not measured by how loudly affection is declared, but by how consistently presence is offered, especially during quiet, unremarkable stretches of ordinary life. When we say true affection embraces both your light and your shadow, we are acknowledging a fundamental human duality. The light represents the qualities that are socially celebrated and effortlessly admired: warmth, intelligence, humor, generosity, resilience, ambition. These are the traits you feel at ease displaying. They attract approval. They allow you to feel capable and valued. Most people gravitate toward these aspects because they are uplifting, inspiring, and affirming. The shadow, however, is far more intricate. It holds the traits, impulses, fears, and emotions you have learned to conceal, suppress, or reject. It may include jealousy, insecurity, rage, self-interest, envy, neediness, or fragility. It can also contain unexpressed potential, boldness you were conditioned to restrain, creativity you questioned, and desires you dismissed as undeserved. The shadow is not inherently destructive. It is simply the part of you that has been pushed beyond conscious acceptance. In many relationships, affection extends primarily toward the light. Someone may cherish how nurturing you are, how driven you are, and how composed you appear under pressure. But when the shadow surfaces, when you become anxious instead of assured, reactive instead of measured, hesitant instead of decisive, the dynamic shifts. If affection was conditional, it begins to recede. You may feel quietly pressured to reassemble your brighter traits without delay. Over time, this creates severe emotional fragmentation. You begin believing that only selected parts of you deserve love. True affection does not pretend the shadow is absent. It anticipates it. It understands that wholeness includes contradiction. When you become irritable because you are depleted, true affection looks beneath the irritation rather than labeling you as difficult. When you voice insecurity, it does not register that as weakness. When you wrestle with uncomfortable emotions, it does not turn away in alarm. It remains. Embracing the shadow does not mean condoning harmful behavior or dismantling boundaries. It means distinguishing between someone's fundamental humanity and their momentary reactions. It means recognizing that anger may be covering grief, that defensiveness may be covering terror, and that withdrawal may be covering severe depletion. Rather than responding to surface behavior alone, true affection remains curious about what generated it. This form of acceptance creates profound psychological safety. When you trust that your darker emotions will not automatically trigger rejection, you no longer exhaust yourself performing perfection. You can acknowledge mistakes. You can sit in doubt. You can expose the parts of your past that shaped your coping patterns. The relationship becomes a space where integration becomes possible, where the fracture between your public face and your hidden interior begins to close. There is also humility required in loving someone's shadow. It means confronting your own. When two people accept that both carry insecurity, pride, fear, and unresolved history, they approach each other through compassion rather than superiority. Rather than seeking to dominate or correct, they seek to comprehend. This shared awareness radically reduces projection, the tendency to condemn in others what we refuse to accept in ourselves. Affection that embraces both light and shadow is durable because it is grounded in absolute reality. It does not depend on an idealized portrait that must be preserved without compromise. It allows growth because it does not insist on flawlessness. It discovers beauty not only in strengths but in the courage required to face limitations. It values honesty above image. It chooses presence over illusion. When we say being fully seen can feel destabilizing before it feels safe, we are touching something profoundly psychological. Most people claim they want to be understood, but the actual experience of true visibility is far more exposed than it sounds. To be fully seen means someone is not only witnessing your strengths and accomplishments, but also perceiving your doubts, contradictions, insecurities, and deepest emotional patterns. That degree of recognition dissolves the protective distance you are conditioned to maintain. From early in life, people learn to manage how they are perceived. You discover which traits receive warmth and which attract criticism or rejection. Gradually, you refine a version of yourself that seemed acceptable. This social self becomes instinctive. You may not even register how much vital energy sustains it. When someone begins to see past that surface, detecting the hesitation behind your assurance, the isolation behind your independence, or the extreme sensitivity beneath your composure, it can generate intense internal turbulence. There is relief in being recognized, but there is also terrifying exposure. Discomfort rises because being seen disrupts control. When you are only partially known, you can manage the story. You decide what surfaces and what stays hidden. You regulate how others understand you, but when someone intuitively grasps aspects of you that you never deliberately disclosed, you surrender some of that control. It can feel wildly disorienting. You may question whether they will condemn what they discover. You may instinctively recoil, deflect with humor, redirect the conversation, or minimize your feelings to regain solid ground. There is also fear anchored in prior experience. If vulnerability once invited criticism, betrayal, or dismissal, your nervous system inextricably links exposure to danger. So when someone meets you with accurate perception and touches a hidden part of you, your body may respond with panic before your mind can process the safety. You might feel sudden defensiveness or an overwhelming impulse to disappear entirely. This does not signal rejection of the connection. It simply means your survival instincts have been activated. Another reason full visibility feels uncomfortable is that it violently confronts self-deception. Many people maintain internal stories to preserve equilibrium. You might convince yourself that you are completely untouched by certain past experiences, that you never require support from anyone, or that you remain consistently composed. When someone gently reflects back patterns that contradict those deeply held narratives, it unsettles the very foundation of your self-concept. Growth frequently begins inside that exact discomfort. Awareness disturbs familiar fictions. Yet, when the person who perceives you responds with unshakable steadiness rather than judgment, the experience gradually transforms. If they do not weaponize your vulnerability, do not mock your insecurities, and do not vanish when you reveal complexity, your nervous system begins to adjust. The discomfort slowly softens into a profound sense of safety. You start to understand, perhaps for the first time, that being deeply known does not automatically culminate in rejection. Over time, repeated experiences of safe visibility build an indestructible trust. You test the connection by revealing small truths, then deeper ones. Each time unconditional acceptance remains, your interior defenses loosen. What once felt deeply threatening begins to feel stabilizing. Rather than performing strength, you allow yourself to sit with confusion. Rather than concealing sorrow, you finally name it. The relationship becomes less about impression management and infinitely more about honest presence. Full visibility also acts as an invitation. When someone receives parts of you that you previously disowned, you begin to receive them as well. Their calm witnessing dramatically diminishes your internal shame. What felt like a fatal deficiency becomes a shared human characteristic. What felt overwhelmingly isolating becomes a point of shared experience. The initial discomfort was not evidence of incompatibility. It was the completely natural response of a wounded nervous system encountering unfamiliar safety. When we say love that honors your individuality does not attempt to reconstruct you, we are describing a form of attachment that respects absolute autonomy rather than exercising quiet control. Every single person enters a relationship carrying a complex, pre-existing identity, values, preferences, rhythms, ambitions, emotional tendencies, and unique ways of interpreting existence. These elements form the sacred architecture of selfhood. In many relationships, however, a quiet, relentless pressure begins to erode that structure. One partner may consciously or unconsciously attempt to shape the other into a more convenient, agreeable, or familiar configuration. Reshaping often begins softly. It surfaces as suggestions cleverly disguised as improvements. Dress differently, speak more softly, be less intense, be more social, be less emotional, pursue steadier, more realistic goals. None of these appear extreme in isolation, but collectively they transmit a devastating underlying message. Who you naturally are is misaligned with what is wanted. When love is contingent upon adjustment, authenticity becomes a dangerous liability. You begin to constantly monitor yourself, heavily editing your natural impulses before releasing them. Love that honors individuality operates from an entirely different psychological ground. It does not experience difference as a threat. It does not read your autonomy as abandonment. Rather than demanding conformity, it becomes endlessly curious about what shaped you. Your independence is not received as withdrawal. It is accepted as strength of character. Your intensity is not categorized as excess. It is recognized as pure substance. Even when core preferences diverge, profound respect persists. This form of love understands that growth is incredibly natural, but it strictly separates evolution from erasure. True growth emerges from internal longing, not external demands or ultimatums. When someone honors your individuality, they actively support your development without prescribing its direction. They encourage you to strengthen what is already powerful, to gently examine your blind spots, and to chase your highest aspirations. But they do not write the script for who you must become. They walk beside your unfolding as a devoted witness, not as the heavy-handed designer of your transformation. Control within relationships frequently originates in deep-seated insecurity. When someone fears abandonment or inadequacy, they may attempt to artificially manage their environment by micro-directing their partner's behavior. Reshaping becomes a desperate strategy for stability, but stability achieved through suppression cultivates toxic resentment. The person being shaped may comply outwardly yet feel internally hollowed out and diminished. Over time, those suppressed traits violently resurface, frequently as bitterness, anger, or quiet emotional retreat. Honoring individuality demands immense emotional security. It requires trusting implicitly that love does not require uniformity. Two highly distinct identities can coexist beautifully without dissolving into an unrecognizable sameness. Differences in temperament, interests, or worldview are not automatically obstacles requiring correction. They are incredible invitations to expand. Exposure to another person's unique perspective can widen your own world without overriding your identity. This form of respect also creates the foundation for healthy boundaries. When your individuality is honored, you are completely free to say no. You are permitted to sustain outside friendships, hold personal rituals, harbor private thoughts, and chase independent goals without guilt. Your partner does not interpret these spaces as threats to the relationship. Instead, they understand fundamentally that a strong connection is composed of two complete individuals, not two fractured halves seeking a desperate wholeness. Accountability absolutely lives within this dynamic. Honoring individuality does not excuse harmful or abusive behavior. It does not romanticize toxic dysfunction. Rather, it clearly distinguishes between a person's core identity and their destructive trauma patterns. If certain habits cause genuine harm, the conversation centers on mutual flourishing and healing, not on reconstructing your entire personality. The aim is always compassionate alignment, never dominance. When love respects who you fundamentally are, you experience profound freedom running parallel to deep closeness. You are not required to abandon a single ounce of your essence to preserve the intimacy. You can remain completely unapologetically yourself while standing beside someone who selects you, not as a project requiring vast improvement, but as a masterpiece worthy of infinite understanding. When we say emotional projection dissolves, but soul recognition holds steady, we are pointing to the hidden psychological process that governs the fate of almost every relationship. Projection occurs when someone unconsciously assigns their own unmet needs, unhealed desires, deep fears, or idealized fantasies onto another person. Rather than perceiving the other as they genuinely, messily are, they see them as a symbolic figure, a rescuer to save them, a healer to fix them, an ideal companion to validate them, a remedy for their own emptiness, or a mirror reflecting back their aspirational self. Projection can feel intoxicating, overwhelming, and deeply magnetic, because it is driven by powerful internal longing, not reality. At the beginning of a connection, projection frequently generates a state of heightened, blinding intensity. The other person appears remarkable, flawless, almost mythological. True flaws are actively minimized or delusionally reinterpreted as endearing quirks. Similarities are wildly amplified and glaring differences are casually dismissed. The projected image creates massive excitement precisely because it promises the instant fulfillment of something deeply lacking within. Yet projection is fundamentally hopelessly fragile because it is not grounded in accurate perception. It is a house constructed from pure imagination, draped loosely over reality. As time inevitably advances, reality pierces the projection. The person begins behaving in ways that loudly contradict the fantasy. They hit their limits. They disappoint. They reveal heavy contradictions. They carry demands and needs that severely conflict with the projected narrative they were assigned to play. When projection inevitably recedes, massive disillusionment follows. What once felt electric and divinely ordained now feels painfully disorienting. Many relationships completely collapse at this precise threshold because the attachment was solely to the projection, not to the actual breathing individual standing before them. Soul recognition operates on a totally different frequency. It is quieter, remarkably less theatrical, but infinitely more enduring. Rather than viewing someone as a convenient solution to an inner deficiency, soul recognition detects a profound familiarity within their genuine essence. It acknowledges their vast complexity from the very beginning. There is undeniable attraction, but it arrives holding hands with deep respect rather than blinding fantasy. The connection does not lazily rely on the other person being flawless or filling an unhealable internal void. Where projection desperately idealizes, soul recognition calmly observes. It perceives incredible strengths and frustrating limitations simultaneously. It does not destabilize when ugly flaws appear because it never stupidly pretended they were absent in the first place. There is an unshakable constancy within this form of attachment. It does not oscillate dramatically between manic obsession and crushing disillusionment because it is anchored in the bedrock of reality. Projection is frequently self-absorbed at its foundation. Even when it feels intensely romantic, it revolves entirely around how the other person makes you feel, or what they symbolically represent for your ego. Soul recognition radically redirects focus outward. It is genuinely invested in who the other person truly is, their complicated history, their repeating patterns, their wildly unique self. It never demands they fulfill a predetermined, suffocating role. Another massive distinction lies in emotional regulation. Projection wildly amplifies both the highs and the lows. Small, insignificant gestures feel monumentally romantic. Small, normal conflicts feel globally catastrophic. The emotional environment turns highly volatile because it is tied to the exhausting work of sustaining a fantasy. Soul recognition, however, maintains a beautiful equilibrium. Affection does not hinge on the exhausting, constant validation of an imagined identity. It persists beautifully even as blazing passion naturally softens into a deep, comforting familiarity. When projection finally dissolves, many people incorrectly read the loss of chaotic intensity as the loss of actual love. What actually fades is the illusion. If deeper recognition never existed beneath that illusion, the connection predictably weakens and dies. But if soul recognition is present, the fading of the projection genuinely strengthens the bond without the heavy, distorting lens of fantasy. Two people can finally engage authentically. Soul recognition is incredibly durable because it is grounded in absolute acceptance rather than rigid expectation. It does not require the other person to embody an impossible ideal. It allows massive room for growth, unpredictable change, and raw human imperfection, while projection ignites swiftly and extinguishes the moment the wind changes. Soul recognition burns with a consistent, eternal warmth sustained indefinitely by profound understanding rather than the fragile whims of imagination.